Chapter 39 of the Centaur by Algernon Blackwood. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. The Centaur, Chapter 39. The extraordinary abruptness of the transition produced no bewilderment, it seems. Realizing that without Rostam he would be in a position of helplessness that might be serious, the Irishman put his hands to his lips and called out with authority to the running figure of his frightened guide. He shouted to him to stop. "There's nothing to fear. Come back. Are you afraid of a gust of wind?" And in his face and voice, perhaps too in his manner, was something he had brought back from the vision, for the man stopped at once in his headlong course, paused a moment to stare and question, and then, though still looking over his shoulder and making occasional signs of his religion, came slowly back to his employer's side again. "It has passed," said O'Malley in a voice that seemed to crumble in his mouth. "It's gone again into the mountains whence it came. We are safe. With me," he added, not without a secret sense of humor stirring in him, "you will always be safe. I can protect us both." He felt as normal as a British officer giving orders to his soldiers. And the Georgian slowly recovered his composure, yet for a long time keeping close to the other's side. The transition thus had been as sudden and complete as anything well could be. O'Malley described it as the instantaneous dropping of a shutter across his mind. The entire vision had lasted but a fraction of a second, and in a fraction of a second too he had returned to his state of everyday lesser consciousness. That blending with the earth's great consciousness was but a flashing glimpse after all. The extension of personality had been momentary. So absolute, moreover, was the return that at first, remembering nothing, he took up life again exactly where he had left it. The guide completed the gesture and the sentence which the vision had interrupted, and O'Malley similarly resumed his own thread of thought and action. Only a hint remained. That and a curious sense of interval alone were left to witness this flash of an immense vision, of cosmic consciousness, that apparently had filled so many days and nights. It was like waking suddenly in the night out of deep sleep, he said, not of one's own accord, or gradually, but as when someone shakes you out of slumber and you are wide awake at once. You have been dreaming vigorously, thick, lively, crowded dreams, and they all vanish on the instant. You catch the tail end of the procession just as it is diving out of sight. In less than a second all is gone. For this was the hint that remained. He caught the flying tail end of the vision. He knew he had seen something, but for the moment that was all. Then by degrees and afterwards the details re-emerged. In the days that followed, while with Rostam he completed the journey already planned, the deeper consciousness gave back its memory piece by piece, and piece by piece he set it down in notebooks as best he could. The memory was on deposit deep within him, and at intervals he tapped it. Hence, of course, is due the confused and fragmentary character of those bewildering entries. Hence, at the same time, too, their truth and value. For here was no imaginative dream concocted in a mood of high invention. The parts were disjointed, incomplete, just as they came. The lesser consciousness, it seems, could not contain the thing complete, nor to the last, I judge, did he ever know complete recapture. They wandered for 2 weeks and more about the mountains, meeting various adventure by the way reported duly in his letters of travel. But these concern the outer man and have no proper place in this strange record, and by middle of July he found himself once more in civilization. At Makalevo he said goodbye to Rostam and took the train. And it was with the return to the conditions of modern life that the reaction set in and stirred the deeper layers of consciousness to reproduce their store of magic. For this return to what seemed the paltry activities of an age of machinery, physical luxury, and superficial contrivances brought him a sense of pain that was acute and trenchant, more, a deep and poignant sense of loss. The yearnings, no longer satisfied, began again to reassert themselves. It was not the actual things the world seemed to busy about that pained him, but rather the point of view from which the world approached them, those that it deemed with one consent important, and those, with rare exceptions, it obviously deemed worth no consideration at all, and ignored. For himself these values stood exactly reversed. The vision then came back to him, rose from the depths, blinded his eyes with maddening beauty, sang in his ears, possessed his heart and mind. He burned to tell it. The world of tired, restless men, he felt, must equally burn to hear it. Some vision of a simple life lived close to nature came before his inner eye as a remedy for the vast disease of restless self-seeking of the age, the medicine that should cure the entire world. A return to nature was the first step toward the great deliverance men sought, and most of all, he yearned to tell it first to Heinrich Stoll. To hear him talk about it, as he talked perhaps to me alone, was genuinely pathetic. For here, in Terence O'Malley, I thought to see the essential futility of all dreamers nakedly revealed. His vision was so fine, sincere, and noble, his difficulty in imparting it so painful, and its marriage with practical action so ludicrously impracticable. At any rate, that combination of vision and action, called sometimes genius, which can shake the world, assuredly was not his. For his was no constructive mind. He was not intellectual. He saw, but with the heart he could not build. To plan a new utopia was as impossible to him as to shape even in words the splendor he had known and lived. Bricks and straw could only smother him before he laid what most would deem foundations. At first, too, in those days, while waiting for the steamer at Bornholm, he kept strangely silent. Even in his own thoughts was silence. He could not speak of what he knew. Even paper refused it. But all the time his glorious winged thing, that yet was simple as the sunlight or the rain, went by his side, while his soul knew the relief of some divine proud utterance that he felt could never know complete confession in speech or writing. Later he stammered over it, to his notebook and to me, and partially also to Dr. Stoll. But at first it dwelt alone and hidden, contained in this deep silence. The days of waiting he filled with walks about the streets, watching the world with new eyes. He took the Russian steamer to Poti, and tramped with a knapsack up the Chorog Gorge beyond Botka, regardless of the Turkish gypsies and encampments of wild peoples on the banks. The sense of personal danger was impossible. He felt the whole world kin. That sense protected him. Pistol and cartridges lay in his bag, forgotten at the hotel. Delight and pain lay oddly mingled in him. The pain he recognized of old, but this great radiant happiness was new. The nightmare of modern cheap-jack life was all explained. Unjustified, of course, as he had always dimly felt, symptoms of deep disorder. All due, this feverish external business, to an odd misunderstanding with the earth. Humanity had somehow quarrelled with her, claiming an independence that could not really last. For her, the centuries of this estrangement were but a little thing perhaps, a moment or two in that huge life which counted 1,000,000 years to lay a narrow bed of chalk. They would come back in time. Meanwhile she ever called. A few perhaps already dreamed of return. Movements he had heard were afoot, a tentative endeavour here and there. They heard, these few, the splendid whisper that, sweetly calling, ever passed about the world. For a voice in the last resort was more potent than all others, an enchantment that never wholly faded. Men had but temporarily left her mighty sights and gone astray, eating of trees of knowledge that brought them deceptive illusions of a mad self-intoxication. Fallen away into the pains of separateness and death, loss of direction and central control was the result, the babble of many tongues so clumsily invented by which all turned one against another, insubordinate artificial centers that assumed disastrous command. Each struggled for himself against his neighbors. Even religions fought to the blood. A single sect could damn the rest of humanity, yet in the same breath sing complacently of its own heaven. Meanwhile she smiled in love and patience, letting them learn their lesson. Meanwhile she watched and waited, while like foolish children they toiled and sweated after futile, transient things that brought no single letter of content. She let them coin their millions from their fairest thoughts, the gold and silver in her veins, and let them turn it into engines of destruction. Knowing that each life lost returned into arms and heart, crying with the pain of its wayward foolishness, the lesson learned. She watched their tears and struggling just outside the open nursery door, knowing they must at length return for food, and while thus waiting, watching, she heard all prayers that reached her. She answered them with love and forgiveness ever ready. And to the few who realized their folly, naughtiness perhaps at worst it was, this side of death, she brought full measure of peace and joy and beauty. Not permanently could they hurt themselves, for evil was but distance from her side. the ignorance of those who had wandered furthest into the little dark labyrinth of a separated self. The intellect they were so proud of had misled them, and sometimes, here and there across the ages, with a glory that refused utterly to be denied, she thundered forth a old sweet message of deliverance. Through poet, priest, or child, she called the children home. The summons rang like magic across the wastes of this dreary separated existence. Some heard and listened, some turned back, some wondered and were strangely thrilled. Some, thinking it too simple to be true, were puzzled by the yearning and the tears and went back to seek for a more difficult way, while most, denying the secret glory in their hearts, sought to persuade themselves they loved the strife and hurrying fever best. At other times again she chose quite different ways, and sent the amazing message in a flower, a breath of evening air, a shell upon the shore, though oftenest perhaps it hid in a strain of music, a patch of colour on the sea or hills, a rustle of branches in a little twilight wind, a whisper in the dusk or in the dawn. He remembered his own first visions of it. Only never could the summons come to her children through the intellect, for this it was that led them first away. Her message enters ever by the heart, the simple life. He smiled as he thought of the bold utopias here and there devised by men, for he had seen a truth whose brilliance smote his eyes too dazzlingly to permit of the smallest corner of darkness. Remote, no doubt, in time, that day when the lion shall lie down with the lamb, and men shall live together in peace and gentleness, when the inner life shall be admitted as a reality, strife, gain, and loss unknown because possessions undesired, and petty selfhood merged in the larger life. Remote, of course, yet surely not impossible. He had seen the face of nature, heard her call, tasted her joy and peace, and the rest of the tired world might do the same. It only waited to be shown the way. The truth he now saw so dazzlingly was that all who heard the call might know it for themselves at once, cuirassed with shining love that makes the whole world kin, the earth a mother literally divine. Each soul thus provided a channel along which the summons home should pass across the world. To live with nature and share a greater consciousness, en route for states yet greater, nearer to the eternal home, this was the beginning of the truth, the life, the way. He saw religion all explained, and those heart sayings that make men turn away, the imagined dread of losing life to find it, the counsel of perfection that the neighbor shall be loved as self, the fancied injury and outrage that made it hard for rich men to enter the kingdom. For these, as of 100 other sayings, he saw the necessary truth. It all seemed easy now. The world would see it with him. It must. It could not help itself. Simplicity as of a little child, and selflessness as of the mystic, these were the splendid clues. Death and the grave indeed had lost their victory, for in the stages of wider consciousness beyond this transient physical phase, he saw all loved ones joined and safe, as separate words upgathered each to each in the parent sentence that explains them, the sentence in the paragraph in the whole grand story, all achieved, and so at length into the eternal library of God that consummates the whole. He saw the glorious series, timeless and serene, advancing to the climax, and somehow understood that individuality at each stage was never lost, but rather extended and magnified. Love of the earth, life close to nature, and denial of so-called civilization was a first step upwards. In the simple life, in this return to nature, lay the opening of the little path that climbed to the stars and heaven. The end of chapter 39.